something I can't. Well, then she corrected it in here, so this is correct. And then this is just some letters that Jackie wrote.
Oh yeah, I got it.
Why don't you tell us about Homer Welch?
Oh, about Homer.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think would you mind if we turn this off for a little while?
The
Would it
fan.
get too hot in here?
No, just pull that.
This yellow thing?
Yeah, pull it about 3 times. Right. I can remember about Homer. I was all involved. What I started to tell you, if you want me to start at the beginning about Talladega, during the organizing drive prior to the
Always give us dates when you can.
prior to the 1934 strike,
Yeah, okay.
which went on about 33, the mills in Talladega promised the people there, if they would not join the union and come out on strike, that they would never go back to 12 hours a day or ever cut their wages below $12 a week, which was in the minimum, maximum hours and minimum wage. But then, after the strike was over and considered lost, and the NRA was declared unconstitutional, they went back to 12 hours a day and cut their wages. So they walked out on a strike.
This was when they walked out was in 36 then.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And Homer, in the meantime, after the strike was over, he'd come over here and was working over here as a representative. So I was not on the staff. I was a volunteer organizer working free of charge. And Homer went down there. And, of course, it was a very strong group after they had been shown firsthand, and they was very upset and mad. And Homer went down there to get it together and sign them up and run the strike. And it got bad. Of course, the town was fighting the union. And there was guns on the picket line. No sense in saying there weren't. They were. And there's violence in and around the picket lines and all. And Bibb Graves, who had always been as friendly as we could hope to anybody could be, and fair, sent Potter Smith, Captain Potter Smith, head of the Highway Patrol, up there to talk to Homer. And this is Potter Smith's testimony in the Homer's trial. Potter said it was about dusk dark, and Homer and I are standing talking beside the road, and so some cars was coming down the road, and Homer said, I better go move my car further out of the road so they can get by. He'd stop on the side of the road, which is a narrow street there in the mill village, or near the mill. And Homer said, let me go and move my car off the road, a little further off the road, because they may have trouble getting by. Well, he said, as Homer got over there, the shots started firing. And Potter said, for about 5 minutes, it sounded like the fronts of France. That's what. And that should have shown that Homer had nothing to do. He was in the sight, right in the sight. Now, Homer told me later that when he walked away from Potter over to the car and the shot started, he fell to the ground and crawled under his car, knowing they was after him, or in a ditch and in some high weeds, and lay there hid. And hours later, Ted Williams, who run a union newspaper here in Birmingham, was there, or evidently had gotten down there in the meantime. And he was hunting Homer, and he said, I didn't say anything till I recognized Ted's voice calling me. So he came out of the weeds, and Ted brought him to Birmingham, knowing if he left him down there. Because the man that they arrested in conjunction, Red Thornton, he was found hung in jail. They claimed he hung himself, but they never explained how the bruises and all that got on him. People don't believe, nobody believes he hung himself. But Homer stayed in jail up here 6 months. And in the meantime, just trying to get him, make him give him up to bring him to Talladega, which the Jefferson County wouldn't do and never did do until. In fact, I don't think really Homer really wanted out on bond at the time, whether he would have been safe. And if anyone knew Homer well, it's like I did, he was a very strong Union man, but he wasn't a violent person. In fact, he was a very religious person. And I was so astonished for anybody to ever would say that Homer would shoot somebody or advocate shoot somebody. So that's what I know from Potter Smith's testimony and from what Homer told me himself.
Now, did you know Homer before the 34th strike?
No, he came here after the strike. He was here from Hogansville, Georgia, and he was working in Georgia. And Albert Cox and John Dean. John was from New York. And Albert Cox, I don't know how he ever got to be a Union representative, but he was from Columbus, Georgia. He never, as far as I know, ever worked in a mill. I don't know much about his background. I knew him later, but I just don't remember if I ever knew. I don't think he ever worked a mill, but he was a very effective organizer and a dynamic speaker. And then they put on the staff here locally Molly Dowd, who was an international board member of the Women's Trade Union League, which we had a very strong Women's Trade Union League here after that's what kept my union activity alive. And after I got fired, I had them people, them women, I guess I might have starved to death. No, I wouldn't have literally starved, but anyway. Molly was put on the staff as an organizer.
When was she put on the staff as an organizer?
She was put on the staff as an organizer during the 33.
During 33.
And she stayed on the staff till after the strike was over. And Alice Berry, who worked in the plant that I worked in, was put on the staff temporary. John saw potential in her, and she worked a few months. I don't know how long Alice actually was on the staff, but all my work in that time was voluntary.
And what plant were you from?
The Selma Manufacturing Company.
Selma?
Selma Manufacturing Company over here on Vanderbilt Road.
That's where you were in 1933, 34?
Yeah, I went to work there. I guess I went to work in that mill in about 1930, 29 or 30, when we moved to Birmingham from Gadsden.
You hadn't worked in a mill before?
Yes. I first worked in the mill was when I was 14 years old during a summer vacation. That's why I was able to get a job during the Depression in the mill. I had some experience. I guess in a way, my dad was working for the Alabama Power as a carpenter building them dams up and down the river, and I got a job during the summer. He swore that I'd never worked in a cotton mill. You know, it's a big cotton mill there in Gadsden. And back there, that was the only place for women to work. And he made the statement.
What was the name of that mill?
Dwight Mill.
Dwight, okay, because we've got a lot of material.
Yeah, well, that was the established union. You see, they first organized there, and I remember that's in the 30s and in the 19 during World War I. And our next door neighbor worked in there and was very active in the strike. And that's the first picket line I was ever on. My mother and me would go up there with her on the picket line.
In World War I?
Yeah, when I was about 8 years old.
You were born when?
1911.
Okay.
And so I worked in the mill there during the summer vacation. And then I had a brief marriage in there, and then I went back in the mill up there and worked about a year in the mill there at Dwight and lived with my aunt.
How old were you then?
And I think I was 16 when I went back at the mill. And then I had this brief marriage, and I went back with my mother and father till after my child was born. And then we moved to Birmingham. I went to work in this Selma Manufacturing Company. because that was the only place you could get a job. It took me. We lived in the Inslee Highlands. My sister, in the meantime, married a man from Birmingham. She's 8 years older than me. And she married him back in about 1927, 28. Anyway, they lived in Birmingham. So when work got slack, we all lived together. My mother-in-law and his mother and sister, and me and my mother and father and my child and my sister and her 2 children. We had a big house.
Yeah.
And
Was it a built house?
no. This home was built by my brother-in-law's father. He was, they were construction workers, and he was a plasterer, and he built the house himself. Back way a long time. He was dead and it died, but he built this back, I guess, probably during World War I or sometime. The old house is still out there today. It's about as good as ever. And but we all lived in the house, and that's in Inslee Highlands. And I had to ride a streetcar. I had to come into town and transfer and ride a streetcar out to Norwood, as far as that streetcar went, and then get off that streetcar and walk 4 blocks to the mill and coming back. So I had to leave home. I had to go to work at 6 o'clock at night. I had to leave home at 4 o'clock. And I got off next morning at 6 o'clock. I worked 12 hours a night.
This is when you were 16.
No, I was a little older than that then, because after my child was
Yeah.
born. No, I worked 16. I was at the Dwight Mill. Worked that year stayed with my aunt while Mama was with Papa. And that's when I married, see. And,
Yeah.
they were not, I was living with my aunt, my brother's wife. And so when I got pregnant, so just to be honest, to cut this off, so I went to work out there. Like I said, it took me about 14 hours, 16 hours to make 12. And so you didn't do anything but eat and sleep. I remember my mother saying when we started organizing the union, my sister's husband was a plasterer, but they couldn't get any work. My father was a carpenter, they couldn't get any work. I was the only one that had a paycheck coming in every week. And I was making the sole sum of $5.10 a week for 60 hours. 90 cents of that went for car fare.
$5.10. 60 hours.
For 60 hours.
And 90 cents of it for car fare.
Yeah.
$5.10?
A week, for 60 hours a week. Later on, I had a good boss. Now, I'll tell you, Joe Davis was a fine man. And he finagled some way or another and got me a $2 a week raise, and I got $7.10. That's why I used that when I started organizing the union. But anyway, he raised me for some reason or another. He gave me a raise.
Did
And
you
he
know
may have
that-
given other people a raise. Back then you didn't know who made what. But he gave me a raise. Well, he took a liking to me for some reason or another. Not in any way, just friendly. And I took books back and forth on the streetcar, and he'd come down there when I'd come to work for night and pick up my book and keep it all night and bring it back next morning before I read a book on the streetcar back and forth to work. So he would come down there every night and get my book and read it while I was working. And Joe and I become very good friends, and later on we were friends later on. But he was a very fine person. He did not show no partiality. He was over the spinning and the weaving, and the only thing he couldn't do things just like when he found out we was organizing, had the campaign going. He came to me and he called me Tootsie. He says, Tootsie. I hear they're trying to organize a union here. I said, yeah, that's right. And he said, I understand you're on the organizing committee. I said, yeah. He said, well, why? Haven't I always been good to you? I said, Joe, I don't know what you've done for me that you didn't do for other people. I don't know. I have no complaint with the way you've treated me. But you know, you've done all for me you can. And the only way I can get above you is to hit a union.
That's a good start.
Yeah, he just walked off. Just
That's a
Walked
very
off.
good start.
And I said, my daddy always told me if you want to drink water, go to the head of the spring. I was raised to believe the union. See, I was raised on that textile strike. It broke me when I was a kid, and my father. I remember me and Mama had attended during World War I. We had attended a big Labor Day celebration. And Papa worked in the Gulf State Steel mills there in Gadsden, and he had to work. And we were eating supper that night, and I'd listen to speeches. I don't remember how old I was. 6 or 7 or something like that. But I said, Pop, what is a union? And he began to explain to me. And he says, it's a group of people organized together for their welfare. He says, everything else is organized. Why shouldn't work? He says, the merchants is organized, the doctors is organized. He says, why shouldn't workers be organized? And he said, now I've got a union card, but don't tell nobody. He said, they don't recognize a union where I work. And they'd fire me. He was a carpenter. And he said, they'd fire me. So don't ever tell nobody that I carry a union card, because the union card's not recognized. And, so when we started organizing out there, Selma Manufacturing Company.
Just a moment now. How did, this was in, let's see if we can figure out the date of that.
Did Papa told me this?
No, when you started organizing in the Selma Manufacturing Company.
Well, it was right after Roosevelt got elected, because we didn't have no right to organize, you see. And when people rushed, I mean, they had so much confidence in Roosevelt.
So like July 20th.
And the atmosphere of the government, they felt the government's support.
Now, was it right after, was it the first of 32, or was it after?
No,
the
it would be in
NRA?
33, I would say.
It was after the NRA was announced.
Yes, yeah. Oh, yeah, after that was passed, after he's got the NRA was passed.
After-
Then we started the drive, they
So-
started the drive
It'd
organizing.
be like in the summer of 33, in July 33?
I don't remember. I couldn't tell you what time of year it
Well,
was
let's
or
see if we
nothing.
can pin that down.
When you work day and night, working 12 hours a night, and you're working
See,
in a hot mill,
Let's see if we can pin that down. You say you only did it after.
Roosevelt was elected.
Roosevelt.
And then the NRA was passed. We was working 8 hours a day, $12 a week.
NRA, that came in about July of 33.
Yeah, well, that's when, right after that, John Dean.
Okay.
Well, we didn't have any organizers. This little old mill I worked at, it's known as a hobo mill, and wasn't of much consequence. In fact, we never could have had a union there because people didn't stay. They'd come and work and get a paycheck and leave and go.
Yeah.
And even Lloyd come in and worked and got a paycheck. Very few people stayed because it was known as a hobo mill. People drifted around, come through, and they'd get a job and work a few shifts and go on to some other job. It was not a very good place to work. And of course, the Avondale mill here was a big mill and owned by the Comers, and wasn't much better off than we were, but they thought they were. And I worked out there because it was convenient. My brother-in-law, after Papa, after he couldn't get a job, what year? He bought a store out there in Ketona beyond Tarrant, and opened up a little store out there. And Mama, and me and him and Mama, and my sister and brother-in-law and the whole damn family moved out there. And there's a group of people out there that every Saturday night they had dances at houses. And Papa had an extra room there, and they asked him about using the room, the square dances, had a club, square dance club. And so Papa built a pavilion and had dances every Friday, Saturday night. So my brother-in-law would go into town every day, and he'd leave me off at work, see. That's after we moved from Inslee out there. Because the first year I traveled on the streetcar. But I'm working after the NRA, while I'm working, and my brother-in-law was work kind of picked up in his line, and he worked into town every day. And he would leave me off and pick me up in the evening coming back. We was working 8 hours a day. And I worked we was working 8 hours a day like that. So I just don't remember what time it was the next, but I don't remember any organizers coming. the people, do you know, this is something that I learned early in the campaign at that time. The highest paid workers in that mill was the leaders of our union. The loom fixers, the second hands who fixed the spinning machines, who was borderline bosses, the electricians. See, the electricians had been in the unions, and my second hand had been in the machinist union because he'd worked one time in the railroad shops in Decatur. So they're the only, we never had any organizers around there. Just once in a while they'd come and attend the meeting. We organized ourselves because we had good leaders out there. These guys knew what the union was. And they were our leaders, these men.
You immediately affiliated with the AFL then?
United Textile
And
Workers.
you got a
No, we never did get a
not
contract.
a
Charter.
but you got a charter.
Yes. And Debbie's got that local in her. I get the locals in that book there, the local number.
Yeah.
And we paid dues. We paid $1 to join. See, the union had no money back then to pay organizers, and we had to pay $1 to join, and $1 a month dues. And I was secretary of the local. And I'd collect dues every payday. I'd go in the plant, collect the dues. We collect dues, and Joe never bothered me about it. I mean, honestly, I would never have gotten fired if it hadn't things turned out later on, you know, after the strike and after I was still active in the labor movement. The old man found out about it. You know, when after the strike was lost, we went back to work, and of course I was in the Women's Trade Union League.
Well, now that's, if I can trace it back, you joined in, say, July
33. 33. We struck sometime in the summer of 44, late summer of 34.
34, that's right. Now, you struck because there was a...
It was a nationwide strike.
Statewide.
Frank Gorman got
That's
on
right.
the...
But did you strike in the middle of...
We were come out, they shut down on us.
Yeah, I see.
They when we presented the contract, they shut down.
Now, was that before the...
Before the strike.
That was before...
Yeah, we were out.
You were out in...
And the people walked out at the old Comer Mill too before we were out in
That's right.
Alabama before they came
That's
out
right.
nationally.
Yeah, that's right.
We were out in
You were
Alabama.
out about the 14th of July, I think.
Well, we were out a long time before that's when the people, see, we had some good strong people in the mills in Huntsville, the Adcocks and those people. I didn't go to conventions, but at that convention I wasn't there.
You mean the National Convention?
No,
The state
where they voted. No, the national convention where they voted for the 34
In
textile strike.
August. Yeah.
And I don't remember even if we was able to send a delegate from that local house, and I don't know if we were able to do it or not. I don't remember if we did.
Let's just stop just a moment. Okay. That's it. We've been desperately
I sure
looking for
don't.
somebody.
You see so many people, just ain't many people left.
The only people we found, the person we found is Stahl Steck.
Well, Saul was from up there. He was
We're
from
looking
New
for
Jersey.
southern
We haven't,
people.
yeah, we haven't found a
Okay,
Southern.
okay, I'm sorry.
Well, Burns Cox could tell us. Burns could tell us. I never thought to ask Burns.
Yeah, how old is Burns?
He's older than I am because, see, I was a good friend of his. He went to school with his younger brother. He was one of the leaders. He was a loom fixer.
Yeah, and he's still,
And they started a union.
is he still in pretty good shape?
I haven't seen him in a good while.
Yeah, yeah.
I just haven't had a chance to go up to Gadsden, and I've been very busy with some other things, politicking and
Maybe we
things.
could give him a call tonight and see if he's
I
around.
don't know. Yeah, I guess I've got his number somewhere. Y'all may have it. But Burns wasn't in. He's older. He's a good bit older than me. He still lives in his old mill house. He bought the house. I didn't know everybody. I didn't know many people. See, I left up there and I never went back much. And I didn't.
So you went into, you struck with the group in say, the middle of July.
When they called the strike off.
Yeah. And how many people in your mill, what percent were out?
Oh, we didn't have no scabs.
You were able to get the whole...
Yes, we shut the thing down tighter than Dick's hat band.
Oh,
Oh yeah, because like I said, them people had no loyalty to nobody. They weren't old mill hands like you'd work for some daddy, you know.
Yeah.
It's a hobo mill.
Yeah, okay. This is, let me
Most
tell you why this
was
is so,
transit workers mostly.
let me tell you why this is so important to us and why you are such a jewel.
Uh,
We have been working for the last,
and I get so exasperated of some of these people. I'll just don't
You don't
put
want
this
this
on
on?
in the movement,
yeah,
and so many of them are dead that were active, like the Adcocks.
yeah,
And now at Cordova, we run into some good people in Cordova, and that's what I wanted to see. We didn't get to Winfield, and that was another shop that got organized in '34 and stayed organized. My daughter-in-law's aunt and uncle worked in there. His name is Randolph Vickery. But I don't know if he's still living. I was wanting to go down there and see him. He was still living. Her aunt, her mother's sister, wasn't. She had died. And Dot says, if you want to talk to Uncle Randolph, you better get down there pretty quick. She said, he may move to Memphis with his daughter. And they still, they would have been a good source. They remembered, because we talked after my son married her, and I began to go to Winfield and met up and found out they was in the mill, and they was active in the strike, because it's around coal mines, and there's good Union territory down in there.
now
And
I knocked you off the track when you were telling me, after the strike, they opened up the mill again.
where I work,
Yeah, and what happened?
We went back to work just without a union,
Yeah.
without a contract. Went back to work.
And what happened?
As far as I can remember, only one person got fired. Let's see, what was his? Jim Rogers. He got fired, but we kept kind of a few people that stayed there. Not many people stayed in there and worked, like I'm saying. There's so many people, it's just transit. But this good friend of mine, hadn't been for her, I wasn't no good at spinning. I was a lousy worker. If I hadn't had a good boss and a good friend there to help me. And I'd beg Joe, I'm not fit to be a spinner, give me something. But you just got hired in on a job, you just was stuck there. They had no no sense of trying to fit a person to a job. And I wanted in the weave shop and fill batteries, because I was too tall to be a spinner. I wasn't no good at it. Anyhow, but I can't think that name. Her first name was Maddie. She was a dear friend. She couldn't read and write, and she depended on me. She'd tell her everything that happened. She wouldn't believe nobody but me. Her brother,
Mabel Abston?
Abston. I don't know what ever happened to her, Maple. She worked in the mill there with me.
Are these people that were also in the union with you?
Yeah. And there's a young Italian boy and his sister was very active in union. I cannot remember those kids' names. But there's just a few people that stayed there and worked there and had roots and stayed in the mill. Most of the time, listen, there was times, sometimes at night we couldn't start up. We didn't have enough people. We'd have to stand in till they'll call people in off the first shift to come in and work on the second shift to get started up. And it was just a bad place to work. And I didn't know too many people there because I lived on the other part of town, and I didn't associate with them outside the shop. So.
But did you continue to organize?
No, that she's in the mill. She's back in the mill now. When did you get fired?
Well, I'm in the Women's Trade Union League, see.
Now, tell us about that organization. Because
The Women's Trade Union League, you don't know about it?
just explain it to us.
Excuse me just a minute. This is an old scrapbook that I come across in some of my mother's stuff. It had gotten in the basement of the house, and it had leaked and seeped in and like to ruined it. This is the program of the Molly was originally from somewhere in Tennessee, and she lived in Huntsville, but she worked and she through the retail clerks, she got involved with and was on the board, and she organized 2 chapters here, one here and one in Huntsville, and So I was active to keep my union alive, and I was a volunteer organizer for the, this is a picture of us when we went. This is the whole group from here, from Alabama, Huntsville, and
Textile workers sleep in Lincoln's White House bed.
They organized, this is some girl, I can't think of one of them, organized around Chicago. Ms. Raymond Robbins and can't think of some of them names. Let me see if I can help me remember. Of course, Elizabeth Crispin was the Glove Workers Union, and it was organized, and they'd take 10% of members in that weren't members of the union, who was in sympathy, because they were influential women in the town. In fact, they helped Amalgamated organize in 1914. They was the backbone of the Amalgamated. When the women first came out of the strike in Hartshaven March, Bessie Hill, who was Bessie Abrams then, they came out, they was spearheaded, and they took Sidney Hillman under their wing and went to bat for him with the judges, and they was influential women.
That's right.
And
Jane Addams and that.
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if Jane. I'm trying to think of another woman in Chicago that I can't remember her name, but good work here in Birmingham. We had some women here in Birmingham. We had a federal judge, Louise O. Charlton. The federal judge was in.
Very well.
She was in our league, and we had several women. Women that I don't say society. They're just women like.
Yeah.
But back then, this considered society. Baker's Dairy, his wife, and we had a lot of women who didn't work, and we had a lot of women's auxiliaries. Work. They did the buying. I worked with them too, because you do the buying. They spent the money and directed it to buy union-made stuff. I worked on the Union Labor Committee, and as a delegate to the Birmingham Trades and Labor Council, and volunteer organizer. And in fact, when I was working at me and Bertie Maxwell, whose husband was with the mine mill smelter workers. Bertie worked in the bakery, and Bertie couldn't read and write either. She later learned. She learned herself to read. But she would meet me downtown, and we would go to stores, and we organized 3 bakeries. She and I did. We'd walk in she'd meet me, and I'd go with her till I had to catch a streetcar and go to work. And we'd go inside the bakeries, because she knew them. She worked in the bakeries, and she knew these people. And they did the owners didn't suspect us. Back then, you could walk in and visit and talk to people. Heck, we was in there organizing, and they didn't even know it. And we'd get them a group together, you see, and then turn them over to the union. We organized Betsy Ross Bakery and Ward's Baking Company and Marietta Baking Company. And she and I did the footwork and got it together for the org union.
This was in
During the time after the 34th strike, before I got fired out of the mill.
35. Now, when did you get fired?
I got fired in 36.
Why did you get fired?
Well, for attending this convention.
Okay, tell us about that.
You see, I had asked Joe to let me off this week, way in advance. And he didn't ask me why, and I didn't tell him why. And he said, well, near time, you remind me, and if I can possibly let you off, I will. Because the National Women's Trade Union League was giving me the trip, paying me away. They called it a scholarship. In fact, I tell you, they did a lot to help me train me. Of course, I'd trained myself a lot. I'd been doing a lot of union organizing work under some pretty good people, rank and filers. And, but I learned a lot from them women. And so I reminded him, he said, okay. Well, lo and behold, Eleanor Roosevelt invites us to stay at the White House. And that picture come out in the paper the day we left, see? and this picture came out in the paper. And we went down and took the picture. We left on Friday night, driving through to Washington. We drove all the way through. My sister drove us from Birmingham in the car. And so I got back. I went to work on Monday. As I started around the office to go into the mill, the old owner was there, and he called me through the window. And I went in his office, and his daughter was sitting there, and she began to ask me about the trip. She was all excited. She said, "Oh, it's wonderful," you know.
Yeah.
And he told her to shut up. So he says, "I didn't know we had a union here." I said, "We don't." "Well, what's this thing you've been to in Washington?" That's his exact words I can remember. And I said, well, I began to try to explain to him, you know, but he didn't want no explanation. So that was it for me. But I'd rather run into him before that. Before we went on 8 hours a day, and I guess he remembered it. Before we went on 8 hours a day, we were having such a hard time. And these other mills saw the handwriting on the wall, and they went on 8 hours a day, 3 shifts before the law was passed, and they was getting the best workers. And we were having time, he was having time keeping workers. So he came up, he was from Mississippi. He had a little old mill down in Tupelo or somewhere. And they called us all down in the weave shop and to hear him speak. They called him Daddy Ames. I didn't. But that's what people called him, Daddy Ames. And he got me speaking, you know, and talking about when he come there and opened that mill up, how hard people were up and how hungry they were and how bad they needed a job. They couldn't hardly work a shift without fainting. And I'm talking under my breath. I said, fainting because they didn't work so hard. And he said, now he says that things are looking brighter. He says, people's quitting and leaving me and blah, 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 blah. That's his gratitude. So when he got through, I said, raised my hand. I said, can I ask you a question? He said, yes. I said, well, I just don't understand. I said, if you're running this mill for our benefit, if we can get a job somewhere else, then that will relieve you of the responsibility of taking care of us. He said, what's your name? And I told him. And he didn't ever answer me. So we got back upstairs. Joe said, are you crazy? I said, no, and I didn't want him to think I was either. So he remembered that too, you see.
Yeah.
I didn't get it that time, but I wonder I hadn't.
Yeah.
Because nobody dared just talk back. But I respected Joe Davis. You know, Joe never testified against the workers in any hearings they had. He said, I had no trouble in my departments. I sat there. He said, I had no trouble in my departments.
Now, when were these hearings?
Hell, I don't remember. They had those old blue boards, you know, and they had the differential. I got to look that up. I got to.
Well, was your mill brought up on charges for not paying correctly?
Yes, there's some charges filed for some reason or another, but and the hearings they were here. I attended some of the hearings on that old blue board. I call it.
Did you instigate those?
No, I had nothing to do. I was just secretary of the local. There wasn't nothing. There, no trouble in our department.
Who instigated?
That Jim Rogers got fired, and I think there's a woman. I can't remember a woman, elderly woman.
Now, who brought up those charges?
Well, the United Textile Workers.
Okay, so that
In behalf of those people, Jim Rogers and this woman.
Listen, I'm asking you that because we are likely to be able to find the records of those hearings, which might be interesting to you. Don't you think? Yeah.
Well, when there were grievances that were filed like that, or charges.
These were
against
charges,
the mill,
yeah.
Charges against the mill. Who was the one that actually filed them and?
Well, that was the United Textile. Steve Nance was director out of Atlanta of the United Textile Workers, and he would come over here.
He came from Atlanta, didn't he?
Yes. Steve died not long after that. And, Steve Nance. See, after the we didn't have any. The organizers were spread so thin. The few representatives that were there, they spread so thin. You know, And nobody cared much about the cell manufacturing company. We had kind of look after ourselves.
Were there other locals in the town?
Well, they had a
Avondale?
local out there, but it never survived very long out at the Avondale mill, the Comer mill.
Yeah, the Comer was really tight, wasn't it?
So you were at Selma, and was there a local in Dwight?
Oh, yeah, Dwight reformed that local in 34 and existed until up in the 50s when the mill shut down.
Actually, Dwight had a
They had way background of
they had a
union.
long background.
History of background organized. They had a local there in World War One
Now, do you know anybody?
and struck.
Do you know anybody around who could tell us about the 34 fight at Dwight?
Burns and there's a few more people some of them couldn't remember. Burns is the only one that could remember, and he was very active. See, he'd been active before.
He was active at Dwight.
They formed themselves a union,
Yeah.
an independent union, and was chartered.
Yeah.
He got us a copy. We got copies. Janet got copies of it, and him and all those people on there. But so many of them, and we got some more names. But I left there, and I didn't know any, and I didn't.
What was the other mills around in Alabama
Dallas.
that had good?
That's in Huntsville.
That had good-
Huntsville, all the mills in Huntsville. Irwin Mills, IRWIN, Dallas, Merrimack, Lincoln,
Irwin, Dallas,
Merrimack,
M-
Lincoln,
M-A-R-Y, is it?
MERRI,
Mhm.
MAC, Merrimack.
May I see?
Uh-uh,
No?
C.
Uh,
Dallas
Irwin,
is Dallas, DALLAS.
Yeah,
Did you got Lincoln?
Lincoln.
Lincoln Mills. I think like there's another little old mill up there that made
What about the
Was
one in Florence?
Gardner Warren Knitting Mills. I think was in Florence. See, I was tied down. I didn't get around much. I got to Huntsville some, riding up there with the organizers and attending some meetings. But I never got to Florence during that time at all. Do you know, I was interested, I knew this before, but I got a newsletter from the Center for Labor Education and Research here. Ed Brown is a historian down there. And he's talking about the Muscle Shoals district. It had, even back in the 20s, had always been a strong labor background in there, And even it was union. My brother-in-law got a job up there in the late 20s. And he would go up and stay all week and come back and work. And they were all in the union then. And Ed had wrote a notice in this week's newsletter about the influence up in that area up there, how they'd have been strong union ties in that area a long time. Due to there's other kind of work, not necessarily, but that strengthened the people in the mills. But they see that right in Florence, they weren't many mills. In Russellville had a mill, big mill, and that's about 30 miles from Florence and Muscle Shoals. But there's some hosier mills. Gardner Warren was hosier mill. Now my sister went up there some later. She when she went on the staff, she was a hosier mill worker.
So your sister was an organizer too?
No, well, for a while. She was on the staff briefly with the hosiery. And my sister wouldn't stay with us very long, I'm telling you.
Okay, now,
She got married and went in business they went in business with himself. And later she divorced her first husband and married again.
what do you think caused your father to have this view of labor, toleration of labor?
Well, my father, the background of his people, they're originally out of Pennsylvania, and they come to Graysville, Tennessee. If you remember Ralph McGill, the Constitution, he was a cousin of my father's. And my father, his father came down there and how he got married my grandmother in Dalton, Georgia, who was a launder, and they were in the textile business. He came there as a Union soldier.
Yeah.
And married my grandmother. And in fact, my grandfather was a Union soldier. As far as I know, none of my people fought with the Confederacy. If any of my mother's people fought with it, I don't know anything about it. But I know my grandfather was a Union soldier, and that's how. But Papa, my father, I used to read some books he'd had when I was a kid.
Okay,
He
now,
took all kind of books, and he belonged to everything he belonged
could
to.
you remember the books he read?
No, I just can't. But
Okay, let me suggest some books and see if you remember. Anything by Henry George.
I can't remember the authors. I read books today, and I couldn't tell you the author.
But was it anything to do with economics?
Yeah, and periodicals he got. We always know how bad times were. We always had a newspaper in the house, and Papa took when he could. And if he couldn't get them, he borrowed them from somebody. We always had
What I'm
stuff
trying
around the
get
house
at
to
is
read. I
some
can't remember any of
is
those.
to help our audience begin to see what shape. You see, so often people think that people like you just happen. I'm trying to illustrate that there's a continuity here, that parents influence children in ways that they don't
Sure.
even realize. You see, and that's what I'm trying to. The reason
And there has been cases
Yeah.
where children influence
Yeah.
parents.
But this is the reason I'm pushing it.
Yes. Well, my mother was just by instinct, who had no education at all. I'm fixing to tell you that when they started organizing out there where I worked, and I came in, I was the only one who had a paycheck every week they could count on. And I told them I was organizing. You were sitting at the table, and I said, I'm going to join the union. And my sister says, of course, she was doing pretty good. She could sew, and she went around with. She was kind of probably in Brother Ridge Club. She was a big church worker, and I never fooled with church, and went around, and she did dress nice because she made her clothes. And my brother-in-law was a plasterer, and he made $12 a day when he worked, and that's damn pretty good money back then. But I guess she felt anyway.
You okay?
It itches.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm going to join. And she said, yeah, you'll lose your job. Mama said, well, what if she lost if she loses it?
Your sister said.
My mother said to her, what if she lost if she loses it? She's just eating and sleeping, and she's going to eat and sleep some way. Mama said, I've never seen any skeletons of people laying around where they starved to death. That's exactly what Mama said.
Eula said this, you see, because those are the kind of things that stick out vividly.
Yeah,
in
but I
the
never
audience's
give my
mind.
mama. My mother,
You see
daddy
what
backed me every which way.
Okay, this, you see what I'm pushing it, because I think this is what we want.
My father and mother backed me 100%. 100%.
What did your mama say again?
Mama said, "What?" Mama spoke up. She didn't give
Well,
me
what did your
anything.
sister? Why did your sister
My
say
sister's,
that?
well, because she's scared she'd have to take more burden than having Mom and Papa. Papa wasn't working, was living out together. And they'd lose my $5.10 a week, or I may think I was making $7 then. I think I gave them $5. Well, I got to make $7.10. I made 90 cents car fare. And I went to one movie a week. Anyway, all my money had to go to the house, you see. And
Did your sister say it in an angry tone?
she said, yeah, you'll lose your job, So I don't know if I was angry or just said, you'll lose your job, And Mama said, well, what she lost if she loses it? So she's just eating and sleeping. She's going to eat and sleep some way. She said, I never have seen any skeletons laying around where people starve to death. I never forget my mom was like that. She had guts. My mother had guts.
Now, if suppose when you went on strike, was there other income coming into the house by that time?
Not on a regular basis.
How did you eat?
That $5?
No.
Now wait a minute. That $5 I gave them.
Yeah.
We had a big backyard. Half of it had chickens,
Okay.
laid the eggs. The other half was the garden. We raised a lot of food back then in the backyard. That's a big lot goes back in the back. And my niece asked me, I want to took that house. My niece moved, and she asked me, said, do you want that old place? And I at the time I was traveling, I said no. So she sold it. It finally wound up my niece had it. And
So you had a big garden, and that helped.
yeah, Mama could plant a nail and raise some. She can.
Yeah.
And then too, later on, Papa and Mom moved up on Chandler Mountain. Papa was building a barn up here on the old Highway 11 going up to Gadsden. And he was building a barn up there for somebody. And this man come along he'd known in Gadsden when he worked in steel mill. This man was a big farmer. And my mother loved farm. And Papa used to ride the bicycle back and forth to work. And Mama lived down there and raised herself a little patches. She would hoe for people for them to plow for her. She raised her a bale of cotton. She just loved it. So Papa would ride the bicycle back and forth to work. And she always raised, and we always had a garden. Everywhere we had a garden. So Mr. Moyer, she was on his place. He had a big farm down there. And Papa lost count of him, see, and that's around during World War One. And so he came by on a wagon, and he saw Papa. And they got to talking, and Papa said, where do you live? And he said, you see that mountain up there? He said, I sold my place down near Asheville. And he said, I bought me a place up there on the mountain. So that little mountain about 10 miles long. And he said, finest place to grow beans and tomatoes. He was just a good farmer. He'd farmed all his life. And he said to Papa, said, what you doing? He said, oh, just picking up odd jobs. So he said, why don't you come up there and live, you and your wife move up there with me and stay with me and Ms. Moyer, and you can help me. So Papa bought an old Dodge truck, and he hauled the produce in, and they stayed up there so Papa got sick and had to come back to town because he, of course that was after the strike and everything, he had to come back to town because he had to be close to a doctor. He got leukemia. But that's how he wound up on the mountain.
You ate mostly from your garden.
Yeah, and my sister, during the time that I was down here, my sister would go up there and can during the summer, and they'd bring food, and we'd eat food off that farm.
Did you get any federal relief during that?
No, sir. I have never. Let me tell you something. Back in the darkest days, they had they'd bring flour around to give out, bring it in boxcars and park it on the people could come down, no questions asked. One day Papa said, I believe I'll go down and get a sack of that flour. Mama said, no, you're not. Now, I ain't taking no handouts. She said, I may not have a biscuit to eat, but she said, I ain't going to go down there and take none of that flour. You ain't going to go down there. We never got a thing. In no way, shape, or form. Now, there was some commodities available. I know that to be true, but I don't know what it's all about because we never got any. We never.
And you then weren't involved in any commissaries.
I was working.
But during the strike, you weren't involved in any commissaries.
Well, you know, back then, we would have teams to go out, and people would give us stuff. Farmers would give us stuff.
Okay, this is what I wanted to do.
And stores would give us sacks of flour.
This is what I want you to do.
And we'd bring it back to the Union Hall and open it up and divide it out. And back then, people would support strikes. But there've been so many picket lines later on, so people got to where they think unions got money, and you don't get that. I was stopped at a picket line one day, and I saw this picket line, and I went on down and got some cold drinks and came back, and they looked at me like they thought I was crazy. They looked like they resented it. I said, I brought y'all some drinks. Oh, we got plenty, they said. I mean, they didn't realize that we never did. What people gave us amounted to a lot in those days. But later on, we always welcomed anybody came by and gave us something on the picket line. It helped the morale of our strikers, knowing they was getting support from the public.
Did you feel in 1934? Did you get support from the public?
That's what I'm saying.
That's what she's describing.
Farmers would come by the wagon. If they couldn't sell it, they'd give it to us. Turnip greens. And around them mill villages down in Cordova, the farmers around there, and the coal miners go on strike down in there, the farmers would all help them.
Now, this is something that I'm beginning to realize, I didn't realize, that Eula, once the strike started, she just didn't stick with her own mill. She was out working on a lot of other. Could you tell us the mills that where you actually worked?
Well,
The
just
mills
when they
that
made
went-
meetings and talked to them, I was a pretty good speaker.
Yeah.
I was a pretty
You
good,
were?
yeah. I could talk pretty
No
good.
kidding.
And they take me along, you know,
Yeah.
they get tired after
Yeah.
Could you say who they were?
Homer, Albert Cox and John Dean. Well, John died right after the strike.
Yeah.
He had pneumonia and died. Albert Cox. I went mostly with Albert. I went down to Columbus, Georgia. I went to Prattville. I went down to Winfield. I didn't stay long, you know, just go down there and spend a day. Because I had no transportation except if I rode a bus or something. They give me bus fare. Mostly I worked around Birmingham. I tried to work on that old Avondale mill, see. And
in
most I
Avondale-
worked shoe leather.
Now, Avondale, they
Or walked.
in Avondale they had a lot of trouble. Didn't
They had people. Do you know that there was a woman told me that worked in that mill during the time when Roosevelt first got elected, and they was talking about minimum wage and maximum hours. And of course, all the mills said they'd close, they couldn't operate, blah blah blah. Well, Donald Comer had them people believing that so strongly that she told me that the lady told him one day, said, "Mr. Comer, if they do pass that law," said, "you just pay me what you can afford to pay me." She said, honestly, she said, I could have knocked her down, but she said, they believe some of the, you see, there's, you know, Homer, whatever reason, I don't fault him altogether. The reason he did it, it still helped those people. He give them trips every year down to his place down on the coast. And he give them picnics and let's say it's paternalism. It was a little joy to those people, and I don't begrudge those people that. Although I knew he was doing it, why he was doing it, and it wouldn't have fooled me, you know. And but he was to me, and he was when Lucy Randolph Mason came down here. That was later on, you know. John L. put her on staff. Have you seen that book, Miss Lucy of the C.O.? Says in there how I didn't agree with her, you know. I was surprised it's in there.
I didn't remember that.
I was surprised it's in there. When somebody asked me what I thought about, you know, Miss Lucy, the book tells you that, see, the guys, she was a woman, and they looked up to her, and they wouldn't say what they thought. You know, us women, she didn't have enough time for us women because we'd tell her like it was. Most of me and Charlie Gilman and Buck Bora and Paul Christian, those guys, young guys, yes, Miss Lucy, yes, and they agreed with her. They praised her to high heaven. And the poor lady was a nice woman and meant well, but she was no organizer, and she couldn't communicate with workers. But when she first came to Birmingham, I was without a job, and she contacted me.
This was about what year?
About 37.
Okay, right, thank you.
It's because about the time we was organized in the Southern Conference of Human Welfare.
That which came in 38.
And John L. had put her on staff as to be a kind of a public relations liaison. What Hillman used to call neutralize your opposition. That's the greatest labor leader, as far as I'm concerned, ever walked the face there in my lifetime. He looked way down the road and planned what the company was going to do so he'd know what he had to do. He was a smart cookie. And I'm glad I got to know him and trained under him, man, I tell you. But anyhow, she contacted me, and I said, she had said, I've got a conference with Donald Comer tomorrow. And I hope we can talk to him and maybe make it a little easier to organize. I said, Miss Lucy, you're just barking up the wrong tree. He'll be nice to you. He's a nice fella, I understand. But you are never going to temper him to the point that he is not going to fight to keep the Union out. And when she come back from the conference with him, she said, Eula was right. He didn't even pretend, he just didn't make no bones about it. He listened, was very...
I was at the Southern Conference.
Warm Springs, and I was telling, I remember one time during this time, we were talking about her conversations with Callaway, over in Georgia, and trying to talk to him about.
Okay, tell us about that. About what Mrs. Roosevelt told you about.
Well, then we were just sitting in a group of talking, and she was talking about conditions and all, and she said they're supposed to be enlightened management.
Yeah.
And she said, I've often wondered and told Callahan, talked to the Callahans, why they,
Callaway's.
yeah, fought the union so hard, and why they didn't feel that the workers have a right to organize. That's about all I remember about it.
Okay. The reason that I'm pushing it, and now it's interesting to show you the other side.
Now, you see, in this area here, didn't depend on textile. We didn't have that pressure
Okay.
in this particular North Alabama area, like they did in Georgia and the Carolinas, and because is more industrialized in North Alabama. Now, around Huntsville at that time, they're having their mills owned by northern manufacturers. They had a little better chance, absentee ownership. The people in the Comer mills down here having to see the boss that owned it every day and how nice he'd let them go down to the next camp and all that. But the violence, we didn't have violence, and it wasn't condoned. The police, for the most part, and the politicians weren't controlled by the textile manufacturers. You go into the Carolinas even today and start to organize on anything else, you're going to be fighting the textile industry because they don't want no unions in there. Because
Judy was just up the other day in Kannapolis, Concord, where they're having a drive right now, and we hope to be.
Other industry, since they've moved other industry there. And they were, when there's organizers for steel and electrical workers, and some, particularly the United Electrical Workers, come in there. I said, listen, fellas, you're not fighting that company. They were fighting this textile industry. I said, because they don't want, they think any unions get in here to spread to them. You're fighting the textile industry. Now, in Columbus, Georgia, Hillman, with his power of persuasion and his connections, he would do anything that he could to get a shop organized. In a Swabelt in Columbus, Georgia, it was a local owned, the Swabs owned, and they had their own stores.
Yeah, that was what you're talking about now.
Columbus, Georgia.
Yeah, but when?
In the 30s.
In the 30s, yeah.
And when we was trying to, see, we wasn't much clothing down here, but we worked on clothing as well as textile, because Amalgamated was paying the textile workers salaries. I mean, it's organized salaries. Hillman had more money than anybody.
Yeah, this was in 37, yeah.
The textile,
Yeah.
Amalgamated had more money than any union. He took care of money. Yeah. So he had Schwab pretty well agreeable if the people wanted the union, that he wouldn't, But the bankers, who was controlled by the textile industry, threatened to cut his credit off.
Copy that. Yeah. Eula, I'd like to suggest we do something. Eula, could you tell me that story again about how you became a professional organizer?
Well, after we went after the strike was over, and we went back in the shop to work in the Selma Manufacturing Company. I was still active, working as a volunteer organizer and union label on the union label committee of Central Birmingham Trades and Labor Council, and active in the Women's Trade Union League, because our union we tried to keep our union together, even though we had to go back without a contract. People just got to where they wouldn't pay dues. So the union went defunct, and they took up our charter. And then through the Women's Trade Union League, I was on a scholarship to the Washington Convention, and Ms. Roosevelt had us as our guest at the White House during that week. The delegates from the chapter in Huntsville and Birmingham and the New York City chapter, which was her chapter. And when I came back, that's when they discovered I was still active in the union, and it got in the newspaper, and the old owner of the mill fired me. So I was without work there for a year, just doing whatever I could to eat and live. And I worked on the union newspaper for a while. They give me $15 a week, and just anything to make ends meet, to get by. And when they started the AFL, they going to start another drive to try to organize textile workers. And that was before the CIO was formed. But Mr. William Mitch, who was district director for the United Mine Workers here, District 20, he called me up and asked me to come down to his office. And I went down there, and he told me, I remember it was pouring down the rain that day, and I was soaking wet, and my umbrella, I'd drawn, and I'd walked about 6 blocks to his office. So he told me that there's going to hire some marketers, so why don't you put in an application for a job? And I had never entertained an idea about being a paid organizer. To me, that was something you had to be, well, I just didn't ever think that I was qualified or had any idea of ever being. I was just doing what I could to help the movement. And I said, well, I don't know if I can do it or not. And he just looked at me and he said, well, what in the hell you think you've been doing? That's what he said. So he had his secretary write the letter. And I don't know how I got to Atlanta. I was called to come to Atlanta and meet with Franz Daniel, who was at the time. And I was hired to go on that Textile Workers Organizing Committee. And that's how I became a paid representative. And never had thought about being a staff member. And
now the next thing I want is you told me, and we want to just get it on tape, the role of women and how they were discriminated against. And
well, we didn't think about discrimination then, and I tell you, most of the women thought the men had more sense than they did. It was more or less their own fault, and it's still today. I don't think it's any different today. But being the type of person, I think I was the only, I can't remember any other woman as a delegate to the Central Labor Union here in Birmingham but me. If it wasn't Miss Robinson, she might have been a delegate one time. She's a proofreader in the Birmingham News and Typographical Union. I know I liked her. I used to go in the newspaper because I liked the newspaper. And back then they wouldn't care for you coming in. I used to go down there and sit and watch her proofread. Unless she was a delegate sometime. But I know that this main time when I was a delegate, and I asked for the floor, they go, "Sit down, you don't know what you're talking about," you know. And they just didn't think, men just dominated it. And the few women who were in the movement was happy to let them dominate. And we were really, in a way, doing the work. And I'm sorry to say that the Trade Labor Council the officers at that time were not working at the trade. Most of them had political jobs, bailiffs at the courthouse, or were working outside the trade, were still carrying their union cards. I know Johnny Carlton was secretary, and he was a lawyer. He was a good union man, but he himself started the movement and tried to get the the Constitution changed where the officers had to either be representing the union or actively working at the trade to be an officer. And they had a committee, and they went and presented to Bill Green, but the politics was such that Bill Green said that we didn't have no right to. That would be unconstitutional. Then, with a national AFL-CIO constitution, for us to have that in our local constitution.
Now,
So it failed.
Sorry.
No, I'm just wondering about the women's participation in 33 in the early organizing, and then in 34 during the strike.
Well, in the mill, of course, you must realize I was confined to the mill I worked in, and tried to help in the Avondale mill, and which was in walking distance, long walking distance, but we used the same meeting halls. We met in North Birmingham at the Masonic Lodge, and we very seldom had a meeting at some of the antis, especially from the Comer Mill over at Avondale, wouldn't come and try to bust our union up. We'd have fights in the union hall. We had a fight one day, one Saturday we was having a meeting, and we was got in a fight up there, got to fighting, got down on the street, and on the streetcar line, the streetcar had stopped while we was fighting. Fighting, they was trying to break our union up, break our meetings up. They discouraged people from coming because they'd come in and the antis would come in and crash the meeting. And jump on and raise fights, and
This was in 33.
but we was trying to organize, yeah. And before the strike, but now Alice Berry, like I said, Alice Berry and I are the only two people in my mill, and Mabel Abson to a certain extent, that took any active part. Out is in the open, you know. Now, the other women who hadn't been for the women, because the majority of the women to back the men, they couldn't have done nothing because we were in a majority, the women were. But more or less it was expected by the women to have a man as officer. They just thought men was smarter.
This is very important.
And only us strong-willed women like me and Alice Berry, who demanded a voice, got heard. Weekly, but we got heard.
Now, one of the interesting things to me is that in these letters that were written to Hugh Johnson and Roosevelt and so on and so on, it seems to me that more than half of them, well more than half of them, are written by women. Why do you think that is?
I think they had no other outlet. They weren't listened to. You know, back then, most of the men thought, oh, women's always complained about something. That's why I never did think in our business, until more recently is, that men is good business agents, because they felt like that women complained about little things that didn't matter. But I always feel like if you take care of the little thing, the big things won't happen. And I used to approach grievances with the boss. Now, you may think this is not a grievance, and I may think it's not a grievance. That woman's got a problem. Mm-hmm. Unless we solve it, you've got a problem.
Now, do you think that my impression
So they felt like they had nowhere else to go.
My impression was that the women were also more literate than the men. They had a little more education.
Well, I can't judge that.
Okay.
Except the mill I worked at like it was, but I would not say that was true in the Dwight mill.
No.
Because the men who were the leaders, like I said, were the higher paid workers, and they had to have a little more IQ.
Okay.
Because I don't think they would have been in a union had not been. And that taught me something back then, and when I started on the staff as an organizer. Most organizers go to the people who make the least money. I went to the people who made the most money. And I would look for the people who was making the best money, because I figure, well, they're after more money and to better their conditions. And if we can bring them others up, it'll help them that much more. And then, too, they got better protection from being fired. Because being fired for not producing or being a bad worker.
More skill.
I thought they'd give them extra assurance or insurance on the job. And I always approached it that way. I'd find people come to me and want to join the committee. I didn't ever try to discourage them, but I didn't encourage them, because those are the people that the company would prey on to scare the other people. They'd pick somebody who was not a good worker or had a bad absentee, maybe was sick and couldn't work regular and things like that. And you want people on your committee who the company had the least chance of finding any halfway legal excuse to get rid of them.
Now, there's in the cherry mills that I talked about in Talladega, which you don't know about. In that whole case, the union was organized. They fired all of the officers. They formed another union. They fired all the officers. They formed another union, and 3 years later, the case was finally settled. But by that time, all the kind of fight was gone out of them. What answer did you have for those people who had the courage to take those union positions, knowing that they were likely to get fired?
Well, I always told people, of course, the law, we had a little better laws, and there were, with friendly governments and administrations, the laws were interpreted a little more liberal. But the first thing you had to prove was the company knew of their union activity. If you couldn't prove that, you just might as well forget any kind of a claim that is fired for union activity. That's the first thing you had to prove. And I'd always tell them, now, unless you're willing to come out in the open, because you ain't going to sneak and do organized work, the company's going to find it out. And I can't protect you unless I can prove the company knows that you have union activity. And unless you're willing to come out in the open and do it, you're not giving me any ammunition to use the law or the law to help you.
Now, in Hogansville, for example, where we've got description about how they organized, they started in secret, and then they went public. But we hear about snitches in the mills. What were the phrases used to describe people who would go back to the bosses? What did they call them?
Pimps and company pimps and squealers. But you see, you very seldom can organize without the company finding it out. And we organized a little mill out there. We had our mill, I remember near there we had a little empty lot, we had a lantern. We said, I signed my union card under a lantern light sitting on a stump. And near out there behind that old mill.
It's that kind of phrasing that we want to get when we bring the cameras. I
Yeah,
signed
but
my
we
first
had-
union card under a lantern.
And we had a password.
Yeah.
And we had passwords, and if you couldn't get in the meeting if you didn't know the password.
Remember the password?
And you could not, well, it's changed constantly. You had to change it. It's changed from time to time. I remember we used for years faith and hope and charity. And we just changed the password. And if you didn't have the password, it was whispered to you
Where did they whisper it?
when you joined.
When did you join? Yeah.
When you're sworn in. That's another thing that I did as long as I was a business agent until I went back on the organizing staff in 52. Everybody, when they joined the union, they took their oath of obligation into the union. Every local they got away from that, and that's sad. Because the people had a sense of belonging to something. They just put down their dues and never darkened the union hall door. And when I was a business agent, every meeting day, I put up a list of names of people who were supposed to take their obligation that day.
The difference between Hogansville and Greensville, and this, you see, is that she was doing that.
So this,
And you had to whisper to the doorkeeper the password to get in to the meeting.
But you just assumed that there were spies there anyway.
Well, some people might tell,
Yeah.
and some people deliberately did it. They joined for that purpose.
Sure.
And some of them took leading positions in the union. And sometimes they'd get in there and they'd get discouraged and feel like them two guys in our local. You know, that...
Now, this is a remarkable parallel with what happened in Hogansville.
You see, they got cold feet and they tried they knew they had to I don't know if they got paid or not. I just got scared, I guess, they needed a job and thought they was going to lose, and they'd better get back in while they can, and tried to get us to go back into work. But they couldn't succeed because we didn't follow.
This is an important part of
But
it.
do you think that those two people, they weren't being paid by the mills to try and get you?
I
to
don't know.
break
I have
things
no
up?
idea. But a lot of people were titled to the boss without pay. They didn't have to put out money to pay. There's people who do it think they'd be a notch up on the... I never will forget a time. In the early 50s, we was organizing a low pajama plant down here in Bessemer. And we told the people that the work was coming from a union shop. It was a contract shop, and the work was coming from a union shop. And we wanted the pajamas to be 100% union made, and we was organizing that plant to get a contract so that that pajama labor would be 100% union made. And we told them we're not going to have no election down here now. When we get enough people signed up, we're going to call a strike, and we're going to have a strike vote. And if he don't sign the contract, well, that'll be the end of the shop because we're going to take the work and put it in the union shop. Back then, there wasn't no secondary barrage. You could do things like that. And that's basically where we're in the shop on. Well, there was a girl in there that, she couldn't join the union. She told me she was a big buddy she was, so Mr. Cantrell's the boss, the owner. And her husband was a good union man. He was a steel worker. But she just, we're good friends, and then she was doing his dirty work. Well, we called the strike. He signed the contract with us. And the first day I went into that shop, he and I was walking down through the plant, and she got up from her machine and come over to say something to him. He said, "You get back down over there and sit down and go to work." Now, she wanted to show me how important she was, see?
Yeah.
But he'd used her, and that was so sad. I was so sorry for her.
Yeah.
Now, that's the way that's her payoff.
That's a beautiful
Because she had
story.
failed him.
Yeah, sure.
She hadn't delivered the goods.
Yeah, that's a good story.
And it happened right before my very eyes. This was a woman who was supposed to be a big friend of his and they kept him informed and helped him, stuck with him. And that was the way she was treated.
Now, did you ever have any trouble with people using religion as a way of fighting the unions?
Oh, in the first, yes. Ministers,
Talk about that.
To me, I think, especially in the mill villages, in the early days,
Could you
I
give
went
it-
to certain churches
That's
around
what do you
Atlanta.
want to do?
No, I just want a time reference.
It's early days.
Early days means what? You
Uh,
30s, 33?
yes, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Well, I spent such a little time with the textile workers. You must remember that.
Yes.
Well,
Any time with the textile workers I talk about, it has to be between 33 and 37. Because then I was I was organizing in God knows what, the bakeries and everything else.
Okay.
And then I went on staff with Amalgamated. And because we began to get garment plants in the
sure.
South, and
Yeah.
Amalgamated was going to start.
Okay, now you're back to
Organizing.
the early days talking about the religion, yeah.
They were preaching, and the Ku Klux Klan come up there. They saw a need. They thought a chance for them to use the mark of the beast and the communist issue to revive their Klan. So a lot of preachers was preaching against unions, and calling it the communism, And that Gerald L.K. Smith, he was one of the leaders, and he would come into these areas and speak at churches. So we would when we find out one of them was going to be at church, we'd attend those churches. I don't remember being but at one, and it's Atlanta. And I was in that mill church out there in one of the mill villages, and I don't remember which one it was. And there's these people sitting. None of the men had a suit. They had sweaters on and pants. Very poor, poor working class people. The church was heated, I said, by a pot-bellied stove sitting in the middle of the church. Here's this big, impressive minister from out in Texas getting up to speak to another. All the building was full, and the first thing before he came in the meeting, now he was out in the vestibule or somewhere out there. One of the deacons or some member of that church got up, and in a loud, whispering voice, talked to the people. Now, this man has come here at great expense. And we want to show him and make him up a love offering. And I suggest that we can make a love offering of $100 and pass the hat among them poor working people there to pay that guy to come down there to talk to them against the union. That was what he's talking about. Of course, he wove it in a little bit with religion. But his main talk was about the union and how it was mark of the beast and communists and all that line, you know. And I just sit there and just wondered how the man stand up there in that nice suit of clothes after accepting $100 from them people who was working in that mill and probably did not really have the money, and giving him that $100, which was a lot of money in them days. How he could stand up there and talk. And I lost what little respect during that time for most ministers. Now, we had some good ministers. In fact, I remember one minister one time, he couldn't give it to me openly, but this boss was using the ministers to fight the union. Owner was, and this guy was a pastor of a country church, but he worked at a job every day because the church couldn't afford to pay his salary. But this guy had solicited all the churches in that area and sent out letters and tell them what they wanted him to do and help them keep the union out and enlisting their help and asking them if the members of their church. The letter said, we have these people in closing this letter say they're a member of your church. We'd like for you to send us back a letter letting us know if they attend this church regular. And all this, and he brought that to me, and I made copies of it. Well, now see, you can't use that. That's the hardest thing to combat. When you run into a bunch of people who's religious, you're going to be fighting preachers and saying the preacher's against you. You're fighting religion. That's the only way they see it.
You don't happen to have a copy of that thing?
I don't know what. I made copies, and I've wished I knew where I could get a hold of it. Yeah, I made copies of it, and I don't know. I can't find them nowhere, none of my stuff.
Okay.
But he sent me all these copies. Well, I couldn't use it. Mm-hmm. One night I went to a woman's house and introduced myself, and she didn't invite me in. She's a very nice lady. She said, well, I'm not in favor of unions. But she said, I want to ask you something. She said, I heard that Mr. Sewell, it was Sewell Manufacturing Company in Bremen, Georgia, wrote all the preachers, giving them the names of members of his church who worked there, wanting to know if they attended church regular. And, he went into the letter about how he run his shop on the Golden Rule. He didn't need no outside. He treated his people right. He was a Christian man, blah, blah, blah. And she said, do you know if that's true? Well, I knew it was headed. I said, I don't know. I said, I've heard that. Well, she said, I went and told my preacher if he reported to him anything on me, I'd quit coming to church. She didn't blame Sewell. She was blaming her preacher.
Sewell.
It didn't affect Sewell. It didn't hurt Sewell with her.
Now, what town was Sewell in?
Bremen, Georgia.
Bremen, Georgia.
Roy Sewell.
Bremen,
Sewell
Georgia.
Manufacturing Company.
See if we'd be interested if we have anything on that.
You know, there's something happened not long ago. You may not want this on tape, but it just shows you how things will go around. That company, they work a lot of people, and we've had campaign after campaign there. And there's about a third of the people that's always solid for the union. There was about a third of the people that was absolutely against it. But that third that fluctuated in there kept us always. We come within 30 votes one time on winning an election. But that fluctuating third in there, the labor turnover was pretty bad for it was supposed to be a good place to work. We had very few blacks in the shops. We had, I remember we had a woman who worked in there called Rosa. She swept and cleaned the bathrooms, supposedly. And that, as far as I can remember, I think there's about 3, one on a shift, or 2 or 3. But they come into the local, go and sit by themselves. Nobody's told them to.
They were allowed to be members of the union?
Oh, yes. We never turned nobody away in our union, didn't we? Because it's black. Now, some of them set up black locals, where they had a lot. And the steel workers did, but they joined our local, and I think I can just see them sitting over there. They always sit together at the union meetings, because we worked 3 shifts.
This is at the Selma Manufacturing Company?
Rosa, when we started organizing the union, and when Joe was talking to me that day about, and he'd always come by and kid me about it, and he said, well, you going to call Rosa sister when you organize the union? I said, you're damn right. I said, she works in here with me. You hired her. We take as members whoever you hire.
Did you keep in touch with her?
Yeah. Oh, I don't know. No.
Now, you have no pictures of any of those women, do you?
I don't reckon we made no pictures.
Actually, I was wondering.
That Maddie and Ruth Stidham, I don't reckon I got any pictures of Ruth. Or Alice. Alice and Ruth and me kind of run around together. And Mabel Abston. And she worked in there. And I don't ever know what happened. I lost count of Ruth when I come back to Birmingham. She went to work, after she got off WPA, she went to work at Mitchell McComb. And then after the war was over, she went to work. She worked at Cress's here for years and retired from Cress's dime store downtown. But when I came back here in '76, I could not find her. When I was asked people around Cordova, that's where her daddy and mother worked in the Cordova mill. I mean, her mother did, her daddy did, and her brother-in-law. She was from Cordova, and now it's not Cordova, it's Cordova.
Cordova.
Like Jasper ain't Jasper, it's Jasper.
Yeah. Now, could you describe the women on the picket line? What did they do? How did they dress?
Well, we didn't have many clothes. We just wore whatever we had. We just come to work clothes. And we sung and made up jokes and make up songs. There's some of it ought to have been recorded, you know. But when we carried signs. Then we had a team that didn't do nothing every day but go out and canvass the stores for groceries. We had different committees to do things like that. We had to do everything ourselves. Like I said, the union didn't have no many paid representatives.
Now, could you tell us what you sang?
I got one dime. I never did take no money. They would get money from different locals, and if they had cash money, they'd divide it up according to need. I got one dime to buy me some half soles to stick on my shoes. That's all the strike benefits I ever got.
Could you tell us
I didn't take anything. I felt I was better off than the others had no other way of getting anything.
Could you tell us about the songs you sang?
Solidarity, yes, that's always been a favorite. And of course, We Shall Not Be Moved. I never will forget one day. And We Shall Overcome. One day one of the boys said to me, Eula, I have heard that we shall not be moved. I intend to go off the picket line. They can't sing something else. He said, I don't intend to walk the picket line if they keep singing that song. I can't stand to listen to it. I've heard it. And I'm leaving the picket line when they start singing it. I'll picket. If they start singing that song, I'm leaving. I'm tired of listening to it.
That's great.
I've heard that song till I'm wore out with it because they ain't singing something else. But it was easy and everybody just... And it was just jolly. And people come by back then. You know, people would come by and bring Coca-Colas, pass along, you know, and stand and talk, chat with us. It was fun in a way.
Now, Did you encounter out there any local sheriffs or constables or anything like that?
We were out there on Vanderbilt Road where we weren't bothered with nobody.
Okay.
The only time we had the day that they had some law that when they Humphreys, Wilson Huddleston, and George Humphreys was going to try to lead them few straggling
Yeah.
people in. They had some law there, but we were so overpowering to them. They didn't even got down there. They didn't even attempt to try to go through the picket line.
Now, could you describe a typical union meeting at that time?
The others run very strict.
Okay.
You see, they run very more or less along logic, like logic. They went on, everything was run according to, you opened your meeting and you went by your itinerary.
So
Everybody
it
had a
was-
chance to talk.
It was the experience of having been in lodges that
Yeah.
set the.
Well, a lot of them people had been in unions, and men is like I said, they'd been in unions before, and they had some experience in how to run a meeting. And and I'll tell you something about textile workers that I found. They're just about as militant as mine were, and they believed in listening to their leadership. And later on, coming along, it was hard sometimes to get people to